Greetings, traveler.
Hello everyone, Season 8 has been announced, and with it, a whole new mechanic called Trinkets. Today, we are going to be diving into everything that's been revealed so far. First of all, what are Trinkets? This is a bonus, similar to a quest reward, that is being offered to you first on turn 6, which is the 8 gold turn, and then again on turn 9, which is your second turn on 10 gold. First, you will be offered a lesser trinket with a smaller reward, and then a greater trinket with a greater reward. You have to buy this reward with gold instead of having to complete the condition like we had with quests. So let's dive into these trinkets and see what they're all about. For the first lesser trinket, we have the Book of Medivh. At first glance, this seems a little bit too slow, and the problems I have with it is that it doesn't say discover a Tyrant spell from your current tier. Now, generally, when you discover things, you cannot discover from higher than your current tier, which means that if I'm on tier 3, this shouldn't allow me to discover a, say, Golden Touch or Beanstalk from tier 5. But if I'm on tier 5, there seems to be nothing to indicate that I will pull a tier 5. So that means that I'm paying 5 gold for this early on, which is a lot if you only have 8 gold. And then I'm not guaranteed to get a good one. I could just be getting offered 3 tier 1 spells. So if that's how it works, I'm not a big fan. Obviously, we'll have to see once the game is live how this unfolds. The next one is the Azeroth Model Globe, where you get a 6-drop 2 turns later. Turn 8, you get to pull a 6-drop. Normally, if we're talking about an early 6-drop, we're talking turn 7. So this is 1 turn later than that. So think Maiev leveling to tier 5 and then pulling a 6-drop, or in general, just 9 gold level, get a triple. Now that's pretty expensive. Most heroes can't do that. So I would say that this is like your normal hero, early-ish 6. Like most normal non-cheating heroes will get a 6 on this turn. This seems okay because it gives you some direction. Now you are paying 4 gold and you're getting nothing for the next 2 turns. So other people that have a trinket that helps them out straight away have an advantage on you. So you do have to be prepared to take some damage. So maybe not the right pick if you look at your board and you say, oof, this is not so strong, because then you're taking damage and damage again. So probably a decent pick if you're ahead on tempo and you can afford to not have anything for 2 turns. Colorful Compass, it says get a random Naga. I'm assuming that they just filled in a type and that this is get a random Naga or get a random Ellie or get a random Pirate or whatnot, right? I can just turn into anything, and that would make sense. This was the same with the quest rewards. You're paying 2 gold and you get a random unit right now, and then you get one at the start of your turn. So I would say that this is one of the higher tempo trinkets that we've seen so far, because you'll still be able to spend 6 gold on units, or you can sell a unit and level to tier 4 if you're on tier 3, or if you already leveled to tier 4, you can now spend 6 gold on 4 drops, and you're getting an extra unit on your board. A lot of people, especially if they're buying expensive trinkets, are not going to have a full board because they spent a lot of money on their trinket. So I would say, even though this doesn't look that great, it's one of those, I'll just take it because I'll get an extra unit now, I'll get an extra unit later, it only costs me 2 gold now. Definitely not my favorite, but it seems to be the one that I will pick if I'm not too impressed by the others. Enforcer Portrait, wow. Get a Lightfang Enforcer. Lightfang is back. Your Lightfang Enforcers have all minion types. Bonkers. Absolutely crazy, because Lightfang was also buffed. It now gives +3/+3 instead of +2/+2. So let's just sketch a scenario. You leveled to tier 3 on 7 gold. Your board is like 4 different types, which is not too crazy, especially if you're thinking of this trinket. On 6 gold, you still get to sell a unit, maybe a neutral or a duplicate minion, to buy a different minion. So let's say, all in all, a conservative estimate, you have 4 different types plus the Lightfang, which is then an all minion type, an amalgam, so 5 different types. So you're getting +15/15 on the turn it lands, and 15/15 or 18/18 if you get another type next turn where you level. Wow. Talk about tempo. If we compare that to what we've seen so far, nothing comes close to just smacking, boom, 15/15 on your board. So I'm a little bit afraid that when you fight someone that hits Enforcer Portrait, it's just a -15 scenario. Not a great feeling if you're in a position where you say, Please don't let them have that. Oh, I'm screwed. So yeah, this one looks very strong. You can tell as well because it costs 6. So I think internally this is sort of a, should we make it a little cheaper? Should we make it more expensive? Stuff that's really expensive probably did pretty well in their playtest. So that's, you know, that's how I'm going about this. So I expect this to be too strong at launch. So not a bad candidate for you to pick on day 1 and roll some lobbies early with. You know, this might not win you the game, but the amount of health is going to save, the amount of damage you're dealing to people. I'm thinking this just puts you in the top 4 when you pick this. Then Goblin Wallet, completely the opposite scenario, 0 tempo, but a lot of value, a lot of greed. You now have 1 extra gold at the end of each turn. So think 1 strike oil per turn. Especially in this channel, we are big fans of strike oil. So that is again a pick that probably you can make when, I would say, either you're really strong and you can afford to just take this and be weaker for quite a while and only get return from this later, or if you are weak enough that nothing you're going to pick is going to make the difference anyway, so you may as well take the extra money. So I think if you're in the middle in that sweet spot where you could still be winning your fights, you should probably not take this and push for it. If you are super strong, you can afford to take this, and if you're really weak, you can take this and then try to use the money to come back later on, but then you're pretty much guaranteed to be in the minus, in the 15 health or lower region, which means you could be eliminated in one go. So definitely a risky strategy. Then Innkeeper Stein is also 2 gold. The tavern offers an extra minion of higher tier whenever it's refreshed. I'm having a little bit of a harder time thinking about this, how good it is. You're essentially getting a half a Toki hero power every time you roll, especially if you leveled. This is one of those trinkets where I think if you went with the curve that puts you on tier 4 on 7 gold, on the 8 gold turn you're already on tier 4 and you can roll and just get 5 drops, and in a not so distant future you can go to 5 and just farm a 6 drop every turn. Seems decent. Again, you're not getting much return right now, but especially that moment when you're on tier 5 and every single roll has a 6 drop in it, you're just gonna hit something. It's kind of like Toki, where you might not hit exactly what you want, but you should be hitting some 6 drops that you can build around. So seems decent. Goldenizer supply. So this is completely free. At the end of every 3 turns, get a Goldenizer. So this was in the anomaly meta first, I believe. It's essentially a card that makes something golden. A Reno hero power, if you will. Reno hero power on a stick. At the end of every 3 turns means you end your turn 6, your turn 7, your turn 8. It pops in your hand. Turn 9 rolls around. Now your Greater Trinket gets offered. This could be a good combo with your Greater Trinket. We will see that some of the Greater Trinkets will reward you with a minion, so you can now immediately golden that minion. So again, it's probably one of those that I will pick if I'm not exactly happy with the other choices, and I'll just take a bet on the future. Maybe there is some cool synergy with my Greater Trinket where I can golden one of my rewards. Then Souvenir Stand, 4 gold. When you buy your Greater Trinket, this transforms into a copy of it. Wow, you're paying 4 gold for absolutely nothing for 3 turns. But when that turn 9 rolls around, you have 2 copies of the Greater Trinket. So in order to evaluate this, really, we're gonna have to take a look at the Greater Trinkets first, but I will come back to this and say, wow, if you have 2 of these, that would be really good. So again, this is gonna be difficult to carry, but absolutely something that I will be trying out myself, because the insane power spike you will have is crazy. I'm assuming you're not dead yet. So definitely a riskier pick, goes without saying. Then we have Token of the Old Gods. It'll cost 1 gold only, so pretty perfect if you're curving where, you went to tier 3 on the 7 gold turn, then on the 8 gold turn, you can just level for 7 and pay 1 for your trinket. You get a Spellcraft to transform a minion into one from a higher tier. So this being Spellcraft means you can't stack them in your hand, but the trinket itself should then give it back to you at the start of your turn. So every turn you should be able to transform something into a higher tier. I think again that's fine, right? Because you're paying 1 gold, you have a little bit more tempo. You're definitely banking more on your Greater Trinkets with this. This is just just let me get through these couple turns and then try to get a big payoff with a greater trinket. Eye of Dalaran, whenever a friendly minion with no type dies, get a random tavern spell. If your board has a lot of neutral minions, this is great. Think of Sporebat. This was one of the most problematic minions initially in the spell meta. This was a death rattle, get a spell. Now obviously it was a beast, so you could reborn it, you could macaw, you could Titus. There were absolutely ways to leverage this and make it crazy, but getting a Sporebat early was still really good because you were getting a lot of extra resources. So yeah, absolutely just completely dependent on what your board looks like. If you can get 3 or 4 spells per turn, this is absolutely fantastic. So you could take a little bit of a chance on this and put some more neutral minions on your board, and then when this rolls around, you get a big payoff. A huge relief, I would say, is most of the time if you have something that requires minions to die, it could get sniped. So think of the Primate as a good example that we have in the current meta. That's a lot of extra gold if they don't kill it before your death rattles die. Because this is a trinket, it sits on the sidelines and they can't kill it. So if all your neutral minions die, you will get your value guaranteed. That's a pretty good feeling. It's like, oh, okay, I always get all my cards here. Or some of them survive and I wander around, but that's sort of a win-win scenario. Either win around, take no damage, or I get a lot of spells. So that does feel pretty good. Trip vouchers. Okay, so this costs 2 gold in 2 turns, which is 1 turn earlier than the this one here, Souvenir Stand. You get to trade this and buy a greater trinket. Now, the huge upside here is that you're getting this 1 turn earlier, which in Battlegrounds matters. A whole extra turn can be the difference between going below 15 or not, and that's a huge advantage. The downside is that if you find a really good greater trinket, it's probably going to be quite expensive. So you are still paying the cost of acquiring that trinket. Now, I still think that this is going to be pretty good, especially if you're not going to skip the Lightfang trinket for this, of course, because I think that one is absolutely bonkers. But again, if you're not so happy with the ones that are offered or none of them really fit your board, this seems to be a great one, especially, again, if you're a little bit stronger and you could afford to carry this burden of not having a trinket for 2 turns. You're getting a pretty big power spike, and you're also getting a greater potential because you can then work with 2 greater trinkets in the long run instead of having 1 lesser, 1 greater. So you can have a lot more return from those. Then for 5 gold, you get Yogg-tastic Pastry. Spin the Wheel of Yogg-Saron. At the start of each turn, spin it again. The really cool thing here is that this is Yogg-Buddy without having to keep Yogg on the board. That's cool. Also, you get to spin the wheel straight away. So you get a little bit of a power spike. You could buff your board, you could eat the shop, you could get a golden minion in the shop, and it spins straight away. So it's not like, oh, buy it now, get a spin next turn. So compared to a lot of other trinkets we've considered right now, you don't get instant value with those. With this one, you do. So this seems like a pretty good one, especially if you are looking for extra power right now, and then you could just get a nice advantage throughout the whole rest of the game. After Yogg got buffed, Yogg's buddy, to spin the wheel every turn, we saw Yogg do pretty well in the win rates, so they had to nerf the buddy. So this overall looks quite promising. I'm definitely going to be trying this one myself. Okay, then the last lesser trinket is Bob Bled? I don't know how to pronounce this. Help me out in the comments. The tavern no longer offers cards from tier 1 or 2. Now, if you're not familiar with auto battlers or card games in general, this might not look like a very good effect because you would think, why would I want to have less options? This seems weird. What if I want to triple a tier 1 or a tier 2? I don't like this one. The more experienced card gamers or auto battlers will say this is bonkers because it's not like you're being offered fewer minions in the shop. Whenever you would have rolled a tier 1 or a tier 2, something needs to take that place. So you're just getting more tier 3, 4, 5, and 6s in the shop. So this is very similar to thinning your deck, getting rid of all the bad cards, so that every card you draw is now a higher chance to be a good card. This seems like an amazing investment in the future of your game because you will also find triples much easier. With no tier 1s or tier 2s being offered, it'll be much easier to triple your 3, 4, 5, and tier 6 minions. There are 7 tier 6s in the pool, and then you get 2 more every time you drop down. So 9 tier 5s, 11 tier 4s, and 13 tier 3s, and then 15, 17 for tier 2 and tier 1. And there is no multiplier, so if you are on tier 6, you still have a reasonably high chance to see 1-drops. So this will make your shops feel crazy when you're on tier 6. There'll just be a lot of really good stuff. My gut feeling is that at 2 gold, this is probably going to be a little bit too good. Now, of course, I have not played the meta yet. I don't know, maybe this is complete garbage because it's so fast and, you know, we're not getting to tier 6, you're just gonna die, you need power right now. That's all possible. But assuming the meta is not super crazy, this looks like a really good investment to be able to find good cards later on. We've arrived at the greater trinkets. First up we have Pagel's Fishing Rod. It costs 6 gold, so that's quite expensive. You get a random tier 7 straight away and then one more at the start of each turn. This immediately makes me think of all kinds of synergy we've already seen. You could save your Goldenizer for this. On the 9 gold turn, you get Pagel's Fishing Rod, you get a random tier 7, boom, you now have a golden tier 7 on turn 9. That's very good. You could also have picked any of the copy ones, right? The voucher one that costs 2 gold, or the other one that costs 4 gold, where you can then get a second Pagel's Fishing Rod. That all looks super cool. This definitely feels like a big payoff for some prep work you may have done on turn 6. Then we have Peace Bloom Candle, which only costs 2 gold. So that's quite cheap compared to other greater trinkets we're going to see. This does not seem to have any specific synergy. It's really standalone, but I do like the effect. When Bloodwasher Tathalon was in its original form, which was you buy 2 spells and then the third one's free, that felt incredibly good. So this is a similar vibe to it where you can just grab 2 big spells every turn for free. Now, again, I'm always thinking about these archetypal, really good big spells. You can get Eyes of the Earth Mother for 0 gold, Golden Touch for 0 gold. You can get Beanstalk for 0 gold. So that's a huge, huge, huge gold swing if you're able to pick that up for free. So I do like this. I think this definitely allows for a lot of flexible play. And yeah, I'm going to look forward to playing with this. Then Ironforge Anvil is sort of the opposite, not flexible at all, but could be really powerful. Start of your turn, triple the stats of your minions with no type. ×3, you know, multipliers are really good in this game. So if you can just have a huge board and then ×3, that's quite nice. So I'm assuming this is just going to really depend on you having a good early game to set up for this. And then potentially later on, you could do something like use a Mutinous spell to eat one of your big minions that has a type to transfer it to one of your non-type minions. And, you know, let's say you transferred 50-50, that's now worth 150 with the Ironforge Anvil bonus. So it feels like it's going to be very reliant on how your early game went. Devourer sticker only costs 2 gold and you get a Mutinous spell in your hand, and then at the start of each turn you get another. So this doesn't necessarily feel good enough for a greater trinket if you are just getting it and say, oh, I just have a regular game and now I get the Mutinous every turn. However, if you've played a ton of spells, suddenly every fungus you roll in the shop is huge. If you are playing elementals and you've buffed your shop like crazy, you can just eat, you know, big stuff from the shop. So while I wouldn't really love this just by, hey, now I can eat my big minion and play more cards, I really like this if you have a good setup for it. It'll be very, very good if you have, you know, huge fungus or huge elementals in the shop. Then Colorful Compass, which is essentially the upgrade of the other compass that we've seen. This costs 3 gold. You get 2 random Nagas, or whichever type it's on, and then at the start of each turn you get 2 more. I don't love this for a greater trinket, I might be wrong on this, but this feels just a little slow when it's already turn 9, so that's the second turn on 10 gold. Then I'm getting 2 of some type, and I have to start tripling and preparing my comp. It feels like I want immediate payoff. Like if we compare this to the tier 7, oh, you get a tier 7 straight away, or you get free spells straight away, you get stats straight away. Again, this stats straight away, assuming you have a big shop. And then this is, here's more cards, now try to make them work. Again, I might be wrong on this, but it feels like for a greater trinket, I want immediate, just good stuff. I want to have a big spike. Then Bob's Tip Jar, which is 0 gold for a greater trinket. You gain 3 gold straight away. And then it says increase your maximum gold by 3. So I guess what this means is that you now have 13 max gold, and then to sort of compensate for that on this turn, you get 3 extra gold. So that 3 max gold you don't get normally, but because it says gain 3 gold, you now have 3 extra gold this turn as well. So essentially 3 extra gold for the rest of the turn. Again, doesn't feel good enough on a greater trinket turn. Feels like you want to have a bigger payoff. So we'll see. You know, anything I say right now, obviously when we start playing the meta, I'll be like, oh, this is the best trinket in the game. You know, probably not, but it's possible. It's very possible. Then Book of Medivh, the upgraded version. You discover 2 tavern spells at the start of each turn, discover 2 more. Funny enough, I like this one more than the other one, simply because once this one rolls around and you get the immediate spike of discovering 2 spells, you should already be on tier 5. So there is a chance that you are pulling one of those high tier spells. So you can compare this to having a Bran on the board and then playing a Panda, the rodeo thing that discovers spells. That feels pretty good, right? That's a fun feeling. You have Bran, you play the Panda, you discover 2 spells. That to me seems like one that I would like to pick more, because I'm getting an immediate bonus of having the 2 spells straight away, and then I get that effect every single turn. Oh, Karazhan chess set. 5 gold. At the start of combat, summon a copy of each of your minions. This looks a little terrifying at first glance. Now, what you can do with this is essentially just make 3 huge minions and then just leave them on the board and copy them. So imagine huge Foe Reaper, huge Whirling Lasso-matic or whatnot, you know, probably different types so that it works with Lightfang or however you're going to buff them, maybe Nala, but then you get a copy of them. So in this game, being able to condense your stats on 1 unit is obviously a huge advantage, because now instead of having to invest resources and buff my whole board, I can just use spells on 1 minion. I could throw magnetics, right? That's another way you could do this. You could play huge magnetics and just have a huge Foe Reaper that then copies, and you now have 2 of them. So we've seen this in the past where you were able to make 1 huge minion and copy it and get a lot of effect from it. Being able to summon a copy of each of the minions seems good because you know, you could just copy something like Leroy as well. You know, you don't even have to build a bunch of big minions. You could technically just play 1 huge Foe Reaper and then 2 Leroys, and then you'd have 4 Leroys for the combat and 2 huge Cleaves, and that's not so bad. And that leaves a board slot as well to either have a 4th good minion, or what I'm thinking is the 4th slot is just your Bran or your Nala or whatever you're using to buff the others. Because then you'll always have a flex slot, because at the start of your turn, you're going to have 4 units, because during the combat, the 3 first units will summon a copy, right? So it should happen left to right, so that your 4th minion won't copy. So then you'll have 7 units for the combat. And then at the start of the turn, they'll go back to 4, and then you have board slots to do whatever you want. So seems really good. The ability to just make 3 big minions or copy Leroy or whatnot. So yeah, looking forward to messing around with this. Exquisite Dishware. Okay, this one depends on something very specific. Does it fish for amalgams or not? I don't know. We'll figure that out very quickly as we start playing. At the end of your turn, get a random minion of each different type you control. So for 5 gold, this is quite pricey, but you are, let's say you have 5 different types, because you would only be taking this in menagerie type situations. You would get 5 minions in your hand at the end of your turn. So that's a lot of gold, opportunity for triples, but that still feels just, you know, good, but not insane. I think if you can force amalgams with this by, say, having 6 different types on the board, especially if, you know, this seems like an amazing upgrade. Say you picked the Lightfang lesser trinket, you then get Dishware, which will be fantastic, because if you're playing Lightfang, you already have a lot of different types on your board. But because your Lightfangs are now amalgams, it's very easy to have 6 types on the board, or even 7 types on the board. So if you can fish for 1 amalgam every turn, you can now very easily make triples. We're going to go into what the amalgams are once we cover all the neutral minions. So that's essentially the condition for me. If this fishes for amalgams, I feel like it's going to be insane, because that's so much money and such easy triples. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I thought there was another one, so okay is a little bit of a weird thing to end on, but editing magic, go. This is like Scout 2.0, but oh my lord, it's just, you just buy 2 of these early and then like, they'll survive at some point, right? Right? I'll get my stuff. So yeah, obviously the first condition here is you have to be strong enough to actually win the fight, because if you're not winning, it's not surviving. And number 2 is you probably need some taunts, because even if you're strong, a 2/2 is not going to survive most rounds, even if you win. Seems difficult to make it work, but oh so fun and oh so rewarding when you do. So you can buy this on tier 2 and then let's say have it survive on tier 5, and now all of a sudden your triple reward should give you a 6-drop. Quite good. So again, a lot of potential, a lot of cool stuff, but most of the time I think it's going to be difficult to make it work. Then 1 Amalgam Tour Group. Whenever you play a card, give friendly minions of its tier or lower +1/+1. Wow. So talk about flexible. This says when you play a card, so doesn't say minion, could be a spell, that's flexible already. Then it says friendly minions, no caveat there, like, hey, all the minions on my board are friendly, so it'll buff everything. And then it says of its tier or lower +1/+1. So that means that if you play a tier 6 card, you will buff your whole board +1/+1. Now, the issue is that itself is a tier 6 card. So if you do want to buff your whole board, you do have to cast a lot of 6-drops. Now, we've seen this before in the form of Boogie Monster, where you could play a Boogie Monster comp, or if you had enough Boogie Monsters, you could just play a bunch of 6-drops and buff your whole board. And the fact that this is an amalgam makes it so much easier to keep. So I can definitely see this being a strategy where you're going to have as many amalgam tour groups as possible, which is why I thought it was interesting to know if it's exquisite dishware, if it can fish for amalgams. If so, it can get more at 1 amalgam tour groups, which is very good. Because, you know, this can get moduled, this can get reborned, this could get venomed with a belcher or whatnot. So very, very cool card, because usually the problem you have is that your engine, your Nala, your brand, your whatever it is, stays small. With this, it will not be the case. This is an engine that will buff your board, but it will also receive stats as long as you're playing 6-drop. So very cool. Absolutely will mess around with this, and this looks like it'll be good. So gonna keep my eye out for that. Then Inspiring Underdog, Battlecry, give your minions from tier 3 or lower +2/+1. That seems like such an obnoxious thing to fight early. Holy crap. Now it is tier 4, so you can't get it on tier 3 unless you triple into it, which is very annoying. But this is essentially similar to Fairy Tale Caroler. If you guys remember that card, it was +2/+2 to your board if you had lost. And essentially early on, let's say you have just leveled to tier 4, that's what this card says. Give your whole board +2/+1. Now, 2-1 obviously weaker than 2/2, but it is also not conditional on the, hey, you need to have lost. So if you have Deflectobots on your board or just any Divine Shield card that really, really likes this. So I don't think this is like some game-breaking card in the grand scheme of things, but just a frustrating experience if your opponent just leveled to 4 and rolled 2 underdogs. You're like, oh, okay, I guess, you know, +2/+1 to everything twice. That seems like something I can't beat right now, because that's a whole lot of tempo that early in the game. So something to be on the lookout for. Now obviously the stats are very, very weak, so this is just a buy and sell kind of card, but so was Fairy Tale Caroler, and that was a very, very good card to play early, especially if you had a brand. Now the upside here is that this would exclude brand, so if somebody tripled into a brand and then played the underdog, at least the brand wouldn't be big. Oh wow, yeah, this one is so cool. Lucky Egg. Battlecry, discover a golden tier 3 minion to transform into. So any tier 3 minion you discover is now golden on your board. I don't know how good that's going to be, but the concept is really cool. So I'm looking forward to messing around with this and seeing if there's some cool composition you can make with basically way too many golden tier 3 drops that you would normally not be able to get, but because you had 2 lucky eggs or so, you have 2 extra golden ones. Yeah, looking forward to see if you can break the game like that. Then we have returning or changed minions. First we have Spore, which is a returning but also changed minion, because this is now a tier 3 instead of a tier 5. That's a lot of spores, because earlier on I talked about the distribution of how many copies are in the pool. There used to be 9 spores in the game because you would go to tier 5 and there's only 9 copies. Now because it's a tier 3, there'll be 13 different copies of Deadly Spore in the game. So if your opponent has that one really big minion that's really hard to deal with, it's now a lot easier to find the Spore. Now, again, early on, this isn't usually that bad, but it is going to disincentivize you from making just one huge taunt minion because your opponent can quite early on already have a Spore and just deal with it. So that's definitely a little bit of a different thing. Right now, huge taunts early, very good, something you do quite often because it just kills way too many of your opponent's board. But with the threat of a Spore, probably not something you want to keep doing once Season 8 is here. Then we have Interrogator Whitemane. This was a really, really annoying card to fight earlier, but it has been changed. So this version says, start of combat, give an enemy minion from tier 5 or higher taunt. It takes double damage from this combat. So the translation is, give an enemy Titus taunt, because usually that's what it's used for. Titus is a very frustrating minion if it's hidden behind taunt to, you know, let your opponent have his death rattle combo. So Whitemane was really introduced to try and counter that and say, hey, you can now taunt a minion and then deal with it even though it's in a backline and protected by a bunch of taunts. You can give it taunt and kill it yourself. So before, you would have to sort of guess where the opponent put their Titus or whatever card you wanted to snipe, and you would have to put the Whitemane directly opposite that minion. Now they've essentially removed that mind game, which I think is fine because that was very annoying. Essentially, you would just be like, oh, where am I going to put my Titus? Where am I going to put their Whitemane? I'm just going to try to randomly dodge it. Now it's just, okay, I guess I'll just play a tier 6 minion on my board in case they have Whitemane and it's like 50-50 that it won't taunt my Titus or whatever. And then the added effect is it takes double damage this combat. That was something we used to do with Cleave, where the end game was I have a huge Wind Fury Cleave and I'm just going to taunt this backline and then the Fall Reaper just destroys because you're dealing double damage and you're taunting the backline, so absolute carnage. Overall, I guess I'm not too happy that this is back in the game, but this is probably something the developers felt was needed with other cards they're going to be releasing. So we don't know which that are yet, but I guess we expect some Titus combos or just anything in the backline that's important. Used to be like Mama Bears, right? Mama Bears in the backline. That was very annoying to get sniped. All right, anyways. Yeah, Lightfang is back, which we've already covered during the Trinkets. It's now a 6/6 and it gives +3/+3. And if you have that Lightfang trinket, it will be an all type. So that's important to remember. This is not just always an all type. That is really the high roll. As we talked about earlier, it's super good if your engine also scales because then you don't really have this weak minion you have to get rid of. So the Lightfang without that trinket is still going to have to get sold at some point. But, you know, this is, we always make jokes about it when we talk about this really good turn where we gain so many stats like, oh, this used to be like Lightfang +2/+2 end of turn. Now, you know, you can stack this with Drukhari and it's +3/+3. The stats are higher. This absolutely seems like it's going to be it's going to be played, right? Which is what they want, right? You don't want to buff a card, introduce it, and then be like, oh, nobody's playing it anyway. Oh my god. I couldn't believe this. Motley Phalanx is back. So this card warped an entire meta where everything was just, okay, how can I abuse this with Phalanx? And I am a little bit afraid at what it does here. So the original version of Motley Phalanx was a tier 6 minion that was a 7/7 that had Death Rattle, give +7/7 to all types. Now, originally when that was released, a lot of people did not really see that use because it wasn't permanent scaling and you would have to get a lot of other stuff. But then you realized, oh, you could just resummon a bunch of Phalanxes. And back then you also had Chicken, the Hawk Strider, so start of turn you could just proc and just print so many stats because the Phalanxes are amalgams, so they buff each other. Now we see, and this was like nerfed over and over and over. It went from a 7/7 to I think like a 5/5 to a 4/4, and at a 4/4 it was still playable if you hit the right cards for it. So now it's a tier 4, so there's a lot of Phalanxes in the pool. And sure, it's a 2-in-1, so it sucks. And, you know, the Death Rattle means that it won't be buffing itself. But it still says, give a friendly minion of each type +2/+1 permanently. This gets out of hand so fast. You could just run Macaw with this and then buff itself, or just in general, have some minions early. And then we saw this with Chimera as well. Chimera was so good at buffing your whole board permanently, well, not whole boards, but your different types, right? And buff them permanently for essentially no gold. You're not investing any gold. All you have to do was put the Chimera on the board, and then you just get the stats. And it's similar here. All you have to do is put the Phalanxes on the board, and then you get the stats. So I'm a little bit concerned here, where we saw just how good it was when people really understood how to abuse this. Now a lot of the player base is going to have that experience of already having played with Phalanx. It's going to be on tier 4, which again, it means lots of copies, 11 Phalanxes in the game instead of only the 7. And amalgams are generally easier to get as well because they can be discovered through Telescope or Chef's Choice, right? They're always an option. So I'm assuming that this is going to cause problems. But hey, we'll see. Maybe this time it's perfectly balanced. Probably not. Probably going to be a good card to build around. And lastly, we have the removed neutral cards. So I'm just going to cover them one by one here. We have Straight Shot, which is going to be interesting to see how this is going to affect undeads. Obviously, there's lots of stuff going on, so I'm assuming some reworks for undead as well, where Straight Shot is no longer necessary, so maybe less reborn-centric. We're going to have to find out. Zap is out. That makes sense, seeing as we have White Mane now. Usually there is just a hate card for Titus, because it's really annoying if an opponent has a perfect combo and you can't disrupt it. So White Mane instead of Zap. Trent is out. This was a really good minion to get early on if you would power level to tier 5, and you would have to get a power spike, but it's not something that was defining the meta or anything, so not a big deal. Penpal is out. That makes sense. Buddies should be gone because we are in a new season, and usually buddies, quests, etc. these are only for a 2-month from the halfway mark from the season until the end. Fire Dancer out. Now that Spore is a tier 3, I can see that being really annoying if you're buying Spores and your opponent has Fire Dancer, so sure, fair. Why introduce that frustration? And then we have Greymane and Moon Eater out, so no more cycling odds and evens, but we saw that new tier 6 amalgam card that sort of takes the place of this. It allows you to buff your whole board by just spamming 6 drops, essentially. So these are all very understandable options to remove from the game. That was all the neutral cards that have been revealed. I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you did, please hit like and subscribe to stay up to date for all the other reveals that are still going to happen this week.